that reminds me of something I actually did want to ask you about. So I think one element of the current populist conservative movement, or whatever you want to call it, is that it's taken this kind of desire for a strongman presidency, and in some of these also these grievances over like the environment and helping minorities and stuff like that, and it took that, but then you also have like legitimate frustrations among lower class people in the United States, particularly lower class white communities and lower class rural communities. Or I guess, I'm sorry, I should say working class. I'm sorry, I'll not lower class, working class in this particular case, and those are distinct in how they're defined. I said the wrong one, but like those in a previous book, you talked about some of those, and you talked about how some of these like inequalities are legitimate grievances, and it seems like there's a bit of a like this group has kind of aligned themselves with this form of conservatism and the strongman presidency and some of these kind of aspects. And I'm a little curious, like, why do you think that happened? And what do you think about that? Because, like, to me, it's not in any way intuitive that somebody that is concerned about, the inequalities in their rural community, for example, would necessarily like that any aspect of a strongman presidency with Donald Trump, that would be a very good solution to that. But at the same time, that's kind of where most people are at in that position. Yeah, what are your thoughts on that? And what's the as you analyze it, like what have you learned?
Well, it's been a theme among people who study this for a long time, that many of these people are voting against their own material interests. And, I think a lot of people don't like to hear that, but I think that there's also a lot to it. And the first book that really did this in a big way is a book by Thomas Frank called What's the Matter with Kansas? And it was like, okay, you got all these people in Kansas who are voting Republicans, and yet the Republicans are adopting all these policies that are bad for people in Kansas. Why is that? Why do they keep voting for these guys? And a lot of it comes down to the cultural dimension of what the Republican Party stands for. For opposing progressivism, opposing minority rights, supporting religion, and all the rest, and then they do stuff like cutting taxes so that they can't actually support social services, and somehow they're able to do that and still get elected because people like them for these other reasons. So I think that there's a lot of that going on. I think it still goes on, because here Trump has engaged in policies, adopted policies that overwhelmingly benefit his billionaire buddies, and so people who are already rich are getting an awful lot richer, under Trump. And yet all the other things he's done about trying to obliterate DEI, about punishing his political enemies, about demonizing minorities, and just being a tough guy, right? All of these things his popular supporters like. And so it's like, who knows what they think exactly about everything he does to benefit rich people, but they like these other things that he does. They feel that he says things that they believe, he does things that they like, and they just dismiss everything else. But the everything else includes policies that are enormously beneficial to rich people and that actually hurt working class people, but somehow that doesn't register.
Yeah.
And you really have to recognize that most voters on either side are not very well informed. And these policy issues are complicated. And you have a lot of battling voices out there. So you have Republicans, conservatives disproportionately watch Fox News. And they get a lot of their news from conservative outlets. And those outlets are feeding them interpretations of what's happening that make Trump look good, right? To these lower class and lower middle class constituencies, right? And it's all strategic. They're trying to make him look good. This is not news. It's a propaganda network that they have. So I think that also plays a huge part in all this.
Yeah, this makes total sense. I could definitely see what you're saying. I mean, this might be my opinion, but I think if there's any way to drive an effective wedge in this movement, it would be to separate those two. Because if you separate those two, then you remove, like, you're still going to have conservatives that want a strong unified presidency, but you remove a more popular following of that, and you remove the ability for them to win elections. But that might be easier said than done, and that might not be a realistic path at all. So I guess that was another question I wanted to ask you. What do you think we can do about this?
Well, first of all, our book is not a book about what we can do about it.
Yes.
We do talk a bit about that.
A lot of academics don't focus on that angle because it's a hard angle.
Well, actually, I think a lot of them do, but it's always the least convincing part of the book.
Yes.
You know, it's like, okay, how can we make things better? Okay, well, we think people should participate more. You know, we think people should learn more about their. Okay, these are like totally impractical. They're not going to happen. So don't even talk about those things, right? You should be talking about things that are possible. All right, so a couple of things are possible. One is that the Democratic elites, the people who are in power in the Democratic Party, as a matter of strategy, can see that what they need to do is to make government more effective, you know? And so this is the abundance argument, the Ezra Klein, Derek Thompson argument from their book Abundance. And their argument is that, you know, Democrats' hearts are in the right place. They want to help people. But they put up so many rules and regulations and restrictions that you can't actually get anything done, you know? And they allow, for instance, existing homeowners to exercise a veto over whether there are going to be any new houses in their neighborhoods, right? So you can't actually build houses like low-income housing and stuff like that because they always get vetoed. So I think there are strategies that could be followed by enlightened Democratic politicians that will do away with a lot of the red tape and rules and restrictions that get in the way of development and actually make government more effective. So that's one thing. The other thing, which is you know, they have to be beaten at the ballot box. And a key to that, I would say, is what a big part of their politics now is trying to destroy the federal government, right? And you know, that's what Doge was all about with Elon Musk, and Trump has continued that. You know, they're devastating agencies, they're devastating programs, they're firing career civil servants and professionals and experts. And the bottom line is going to be government's just not going to be able to perform. You know, government's not going to be able to, you know, you're going to call Social Security and nobody's going to answer the phone. You know, okay, so how are people going to like that? They're not. So I think one possibility is, as this thing plays out, and you have emergencies, and there is no FEMA to come to the rescue, then people are going to be mad, and they're going to be mad at Trump and the Republicans, just like they're going to be mad at Trump and the Republicans because these healthcare costs are going up right now, the amounts that people have to pay. And that, from an electoral standpoint, that's terrible for them and good for the Democrats. So it may well be that exactly because the Republicans are doing what they're doing and destroying the government, the Democrats are going to come out of this in good shape because people are going to react negatively to a government that doesn't perform, right? They call Social Security, they want someone to answer the phone. So I think it's possible that the Republicans will pay a price. And if they do, and if they start losing, then the next step is, okay, there may be Republicans who look at this and go, we can't do that anymore. This is a loser. We have to be different in order to stop losing. So if it's possible to get them to the point where they're losing elections, they would have to make decisions about what they're going to do going forward. And that could change them. So there's hope there. Also, if they don't change, they'll just keep losing. Okay, great. So either way, it doesn't look good for them. But another thing, I don't mean to just keep blabbering here, but another thing is that they're trying to change the election rules, and change them in a way that even if people are discontent, their votes don't count, right? So they can't actually get Republicans out of office. That's what all this gerrymandering is about, right? So they will do everything they can. And voter ID law, same thing. Trying to prevent people from voting, trying to make sure that the kinds of people who might vote Democratic can't vote. And that's what Republican electoral politics has been all about for, maybe 15 years.
Yeah, this makes total sense. I mean, the optimist in me thinks that, this cutting key services and things and some of this stuff will result in a pushback that kind of kills this type of movement, or allows the movement to kind of run out of oxygen in terms of electoral support. The cynic in me thinks oh no, when people are upset about their programs being cut, they will go run to, they'll believe a Trump narrative or a conservative narrative, and they'll blame the other side or something, and they'll misattribute why healthcare is going up or FEMA's going up or something like that. FEMA's not there. And between that and the voting changes, this will become like a self-fulfilling feedback loop that will only get worse. That's what the cynic says in me. Which one do you think, or something else, which side do you think will win out? Do you think this movement will plateau and kind of eventually shift to something else or crash? Or do you think this will just continue to build, and this will just be the direction that the United States goes?
Well, this is very unscientific, so I don't know. We're guessing, right?
Any forecasting is.
So I guess what I would say is more than likely the government will perform worse as time goes on. It will perform worse because of things the Republicans have done that have been well publicized. And I think people actually want a government that works. And you never really appreciate government when it's there, but when it's gone, you suddenly see you need FEMA, And you need these other government organizations to help you. You need a CDC, to tell us something about vaccines. You need an FDA to keep bad drugs off the market, and on and on and on. So I think as time goes on, people do want effective government, and B, I think as government goes down, people won't like that. And they will ultimately say, bring back government. We need a party that will champion government and make government work well. So I think if Democrats can pivot to be the party of effective government, but still the party of government, I think that should work well for them. So I think that's the ray of sunshine, at the end of the day. I'm hoping that it is.
There we go. The final, that actually relates to the final question I was going to ask you, which was, for anyone interested in learning more about your work, where can they go? So obviously that is both where can they go to find out about this book, and then also where can they go to find out about some of your other books and research too?
Well, I think the single place to go is this book.
Yes.
Trajectory of Power, The Rise of the Strongman Presidency.
Yeah.
We've written other things over the years. We had another book in 2020, which is about the president's populism and the crisis of democracy. So it sounds a lot like this book, except that this book is much more comprehensive in attempting to look over the entire history of presidential power and explain how it is that presidential power has grown to be so expansive that it has actually gotten to the point that it can bring democracy down. How did that happen? And what it requires is a grand scope of analysis to take it all in. There's a lot in there. But I think it all fits together logically, step by step, in a way that anybody can understand, and that, in my view, provides an accurate, enlightening account of presidential power. And it's not just about Trump; it's about the whole thing, and how Trump sort of emerged at the end. How did that happen? And what's likely to happen after he's gone? Because there's a logic that drives this whole thing, that anyone can understand. So, William and I have been teaching and studying and writing about the presidency for decades. I hate to admit it, but we have. And in both our view, this is the most important thing we've written and the most comprehensive thing. It's like we took everything that was in our brain and put it down in a straightforward way that organizes everything and explains it to everybody. So we're really happy that we finally had a chance to do this in our careers. And, we hope that people learn from it, and pay attention to it. I know today a lot of people just don't read books. They don't. They read blogs and stuff like that. But it's too bad, because in a book you can really say a lot, and you can provide an account of hundreds of years of really interesting developments, and do it in a way that makes real logical sense, step by step. This happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. And it's simple. There it is. And my fear is that there are a lot of people who just don't read and think they can, read something that's 5 minutes long and understand. And you can't do that. You need to just sit down with books and take the time, read the book, and then you come away with a much deeper understanding.
Yeah, I could understand that. I could understand the value of taking a thinker and sitting down with their thought for a longer period, especially something that's kind of a synthesis of that person's thought over their lives, over their many decades, and that's an incredibly valuable thing. And I think that's one of the big things lost sometimes in looking at shorter media, is that it's much more the conversation of the moment. I think you can sometimes get less of that. This is what the person this is a synthesis of a person's process over a long period, because there's a lot to be learned from engaging with people's thoughts over their lifetimes, let's just say, because there's a lot of meat in that, and it can be worth reflecting on. So everyone, I think I do agree, everyone should check out your book, The Trajectory of Power. You guys do have some other books that I do like as well, but maybe that I agree that this is probably a good first book to start with.
I think people should start there. One thing, in the past, it probably didn't matter that much because, as we say, there was this normal presidency, and you could talk about the presidency, and it made sense. If you were talking about Nixon, fine. If you were talking about FDR, fine, or Woodrow Wilson, okay. They're all presidents. They're all sort of behaving like presidents. And they were like these parameters that help you understand how presidents behave. But that's not true anymore. And so in order to understand like Donald Trump or even George W. Bush, I think you need to think about things differently. Right? So this is a moving train, and trying to write a book when the train is moving is really hard. It's like we finished this book at the end of 2024 after the election. We delayed it until after the election so we knew who won. But we never got to see Trump's first or his second term. So all we had was our analysis that basically said, okay, here's this whole analysis explaining the rise of the strongman presidency. This guy is going to become president again. It's going to be bad, right? So we could say, look, he's going to be unhinged, especially because of the immunity decision. God help us all. But we didn't actually get to see it, right? So that's the moving train part. So now it's been a year. Right? Because, the book had to go into production, right? And it has to be copy edited and all that stuff. That takes months. Meantime, things are happening in the world. So it's unfortunate that it happens that way, but we feel good that our book actually captured what was happening. I think that our explanation is right about this. So anyway, if you go back to 2020, a lot more has happened, in between 2020 and this book, 2025. So I think that a lot of that book was an effort to get people to understand populism and where it came from, and why effective government was such an important force in creating populism. And creating so much anti-government sentiment, and that connects to our earlier book, which is Relic, which was about how the Constitution actually undermines effective government. The books are connected.
Yeah, this makes sense. It's very interesting to look at both. People talk about how completely unprecedented the second term of Trump is, but it really isn't. And it can be interesting even to look at predictions in the late 2024, because a lot of the stuff he did, some of the details may not have been predicted, but a lot of it was pretty predictable. And actually something you said did connect to another one aspect that I think is a big fear. So, which is the courts and like the immunity. So like,
Yeah.
I remember at another point in this conversation, you were talking about how the position among the conservatives at the time, this was several decades ago, was that Congress will never do this thing that they want, the courts will never do this thing that they want, so the president's got to do it. But at least as of now, it seems like the courts, at least the Supreme Court, is as much on board with some of this stuff. And at the present moment, Congress seems to be too, but Congress could flip-flop every couple years because Congress just does that. But the courts, it seems like they're going to be, it doesn't seem like they're going to change anytime soon. The Supreme Court specifically will change anytime soon. And I think that's another scary aspect, that the movement in and of itself it's all about the executive, and the executive is on board with it, but it really seems like a two branch of government. It's both the Supreme Court and the president that are pushing for this type of changes, and I think that's another ultra scary aspect.
Very, very much so. This whole business about separation of powers has pretty much been shown to be built on sand. It doesn't really work when you're presented with a real autocrat, especially when he knows what he's doing. I don't know that Trump knows anything, but he's surrounded now by people who do know a lot, who are very sharp, and are making this thing happen. So, what you said about the courts, what the founders wanted was for these branches to check one another, right? But then look at what you have with the courts. These six are wedded, they wouldn't say so, but they are, to the unitary executive theory, right? And so that theory says that the Constitution vests in the president vast, expansive unilateral power that's essentially unconstrained by Congress and the courts, and can't be constrained. Okay, and that should be the law. Okay, what is the law normally? The way that the framers thought about the law was that the law exists to constrain members of government from doing things you don't want them to do, right? And so the laws are constraints. And what the Supreme Court is doing is lifting constraints on presidents, right? And basically creating what amounts to a lawless situation where what they're saying, in effect, is, Congress can't come in and do anything to restrict your removal power. You can do whatever you want. And so, and the same is true here and here and here. And what we're really saying is there are no laws for you that can constrain what you're doing. So you can just do whatever you want. You have an Article 2 and you can do whatever you want, just like Trump said, right? And so the weird thing is they're creating a body of law in which the law is unconstraining and therefore really doesn't function in the way laws are supposed to function, but instead liberates the president to do whatever he darn well pleases. And this is happening because years ago, the conservatives developed this unitary executive theory during the Reagan years, and conservative judges and legal scholars embraced it, and now they're ascendant. Right now they have enough power to impose it on the whole country, right through the Supreme Court. And so is the Supreme Court going to check Trump? No. They might do it in particular cases, like the tariff case, we'll see. But that's a very particular case. We could talk about that if you wanted. But in general, they want a powerful presidency, and the epitome of that, the best case of that, is the immunity case. I mean, that is a travesty. In my view, it's a stain on the Roberts Court that Roberts will never, ever, ever live down. It is the most dangerous decision that the court has ever made in its entire history. setting the president up as above the law. Basically, nothing that he can do in his official acts can ever be held accountable or prosecuted. And I can't imagine that the framers would ever have gone along with that. And this Supreme Court with a straight face can nonetheless adopt that opinion. It's just, I think, shocking. But that's where the court is nowadays. The president can do what he wants. You can't hold him accountable. All right. No democratic system can work that way.
Yeah,
Accountability is at the heart of it.
I absolutely agree. Yeah, the Supreme Court seems to want this, at least the majority in the Supreme Court. And then, yeah, I think this case, it seems like in each era, there are key cases that historically are looked upon as very bad decisions, like the Dred Scott case, maybe Plessy versus Ferguson, cases like that. But I agree. I think this one, history will look back on and say this was definitely the worst of this era. And I agree with you. It could well be the worst ever in U.S. history. That might not be an exaggeration. That might literally be what history says of it. It's very sad.
Yeah.
And I part of me, I mean, the electoral process, like what you said at the beginning, people might swing in the direction of, oh no, we actually do, the federal government does all these beneficial things, and get angry at, Trump and the Republicans for basically getting them. But I think as long as that's in place, there will always be it's not just a path, but a very easy path to authoritarianism.
To what?
As long as that Supreme Court case is the official decision of, or the official interpretation of the Constitution, there will always be not just a path, but an easy path to authoritarianism for a future president.
Yes. And for this president.
Yes.
I think he's behaving as an authoritarian right now.
He definitely is.
I mean, this is what it looks like.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he's not taking most ordinary citizens out of their home and throwing them in prison, but he's doing things that look like that to immigrants.
Yeah.
Having masked agents tackle them in the streets, no due process, and take them away. And I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg. I think he's behaving in an authoritarian way in many, many, many different ways. And if we had more time, we could just go into that, because I think that is where his strongman presidency has gone, and he is just unleashed. Right? He is the strongman. He's exercising power in whatever ways he wants. Whatever whim may move him at any given moment, and God help everybody else.
Yeah,
I think this is what it looks like in our society, anyway.
Yeah, I agree, and yeah, I mean, maybe we'll have to have a second conversation where we talk about more details on the Trump presidency, because this one we focused on the history, but I do absolutely agree with that. I guess for now, thanks for taking the time to talk, and I think this has been a very helpful, very eye-opening conversation. It's both necessary to what we were talking about at the end, to understand what's happening now, but it's also, to reference the beginning, it's also helpful to understand even what Trump's doing is awful, but it still has a history behind it, and it's still a build-up of what a lot of other presidents, maybe particularly Republican presidents, have done, like you talk about in your book.
Well, it has been asymmetric, and that's an important theme. Yeah, it's really Republican presidents doing this, and when Democrats have violated what we might think of as democratic bounds, it's been a thing or two here and there. Obama bombs Libya, for instance. Okay, yeah, he did that. And he probably shouldn't have done that. I mean, I think that what he did might have been illegal. But that hardly puts him in the same class as Trump, who has so many of those transgressions against the law, you couldn't even count them all. Right? This is his whole approach to the presidency. And so I think some people on the right try to make themselves feel better and absolve Trump of any responsibility by saying, oh, well, they all do it. Well, they don't all do it. You can find an example or two here or there. That's just misleading. Right? Look at the big picture. Look at what's happening here. Right? Trump is basically thumbing his nose at the rule of law, and he is an anti-democratic leader who wants to govern unilaterally, and that is not the way Obama or Clinton or Biden or other Democrats have ruled. And this is not because they're wonderful people and that's why they're doing it. I think it's because Democrats have completely different incentives when it comes to how they govern than Republicans do, and it so happens that for historical reasons, Republicans have incentives to pursue a presidency of extraordinary power and ultimately a strongman presidency. And Democrats do not have those same incentives.
Yeah.
That it comes down to.
This makes total sense. Well, thanks for taking the time to be able to outline this for us.
Sure.